How do you assess the role of the United Nations as a multilateral organization in these current times of the polycrisis that you mentioned at our conference?
I think it's very hard to see that multilateralism has not suffered. Multilateralism has suffered. There's so many differences geopolitically. There's so many trends that are basically making these states move away from each other rather than towards each other. I mean, think about the difficulties between the United States and China, for example. Think about the conflicts that have erupted, the Russian invasion into the Ukraine. Think about the conflict in the Middle East that we have seen. This should be the moment where member states get together, particularly the powerful member states get together. But what we're seeing is that also the powerful states are getting involved in these conflicts. And that makes it very, very hard, because what does that mean for the rest of the states, the smaller states that are relying on the United Nations, because that's where they have a voice. They don't have a voice in other organizations, maybe in a small regional organization. And I think that the Secretary General, who is very keen on having new ideas, he had issued a new agenda for peace, he had pandemic prevention initiatives, he wants to organize a summit for the future next year. What is going to come out of the summit of the future unless there's a will of member states to say, yes, we want to do this project jointly, rather than at differences with each other? And that, I think, makes me very fearful that we will not have a successful summit for the future, but rather a declaration that is devoid of actual meaningful impact. That I would find very, very sad, because it's a one-time opportunity.
What is the key thing that the United Nations need in order to reform itself? I mean, obviously the Security Council is the one which is important to reform, but what is it else? What is the role of Russia? What is the role of veto powers of the countries in the Security Council? So is there any thinking of how it is possible to reform or not?
I think it is possible to reform, but what you really need is the willingness of member states. You know, you can make proposals, and over the various secretaries generals that I have worked with, they have made proposals. Some of them have been good, other ones have been okay, but on the other hand, there have always been proposals to reform the United Nations. Security Council is one reform that is absolutely crucial, but of course that reform would need the agreement of the 5 permanent members. And let's also remember that when the UN was founded 78 years ago, everyone thinks, oh, the P5, those are the nuclear weapon states. But they're not, because they didn't have all nuclear weapons. The US was the only one that had nuclear weapons. And actually the Charter of the United Nations was drawn up even before the United States had nuclear weapons. No, it is the victors of the Second World War. And they have to agree to any reform that takes place. That means an expansion of the Council, but that also means the permanent membership of the Council. And if they would be willing to also look at the veto power that they have, I think that would do wonders for the world, because the veto power is not very helpful in international institutions, because what you've seen is that you cannot have an agreement on Ukraine in the Security Council, because it will be vetoed. And so therefore, we have seen that in other areas where also it used to be that if there is a country that is party to a conflict, that country must recuse itself from participating in the Security Council. Well, that sort of has fallen by the wayside somehow, because you have countries that are involved in conflicts, and I don't only mean Russia in this particular case, and they don't really care about that anymore. It was never written down in the Charter, hence it will not be preserved. And that I find very difficult, because it means that there is a standard deterioration very, very strongly that is against multilateralism, against pulling together as countries, as societies, as an international community, which are looking at problems together rather than against each other. There's so many problems that don't have borders. I mean, you know, look at migration, look at climate change. Everything is not limited to a country, but it goes and affects a region, or it affects the whole world. And for that you need a lot more consistency in terms of holding together and wanting to achieve multilateral global solutions. And that I don't see happening, and that I'm very worried about.